Well, for some analysis, we're now joined by international relations expert, Professor John Stremlau. Prof, good to talk to you. It's been a while. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's nice to be here. I'm sitting in Washington.
Ah, great. So nice weather for you. I'm just wondering, countering malign Russian activities in Africa Act. On the face of it, it doesn't sound bad because it's only dealing with malign Russian activity.
Well, Peter, first of all, Congressman Meeks, of the chairman who sponsored the legislation in the House, is an old friend of Africa. He's African American, and I don't think he is interested in punishing African countries. I do think, though, however, there is a desire on the part of American congressmen to get to the bottom of what is going on with regard to Russian behavior in Africa. There is not only the Wagner Group, but accusations about bots and disinformation and aiding autocrats and corrupt under-the-table payments that may or may not have been made with regard to the nuclear deal in South Africa, for example. So there is a desire to find out more, and the bill that passed the House, which I've read, only asks, it's very short, it only asks the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to deliver a report. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, the president, issued his own statement on almost the same day, calling on a comprehensive rethink of how the major powers are working in Africa, but particularly the Russians right now, because the movement by Vladimir Putin to recolonize Ukraine and the violence that has resulted from that has had a lot of unintended consequences, including the terrible impact on food availability in Africa, which has been ravaged by droughts, particularly in the North African countries that were mentioned in that very good piece that summarized the Washington Post that you led with. So I can answer other questions, but it's a little hard to know exactly what's going on in this complicated picture.
Do you think that this has been prompted by the Ukraine invasion, or is this something that America has been thinking about for some time as this scramble for Africa Part 2 plays out in terms of trying to get hands on minerals, influence, and the economics of the continent?
Well, look, the interest that American voters have in Ukraine, much less Africa, is minuscule. America is deeply divided. There's a state capture project going on by the Republicans. You could see Donald Trump not winning a popular vote, but getting elected by the Electoral College in 2024. So that the reliability of the U.S. In light of the domestic upheavals going on here is questionable. But I must recall that when I was in Johannesburg before visiting family here, Wendy Sherman, the Deputy Secretary of State, was visiting South Africa, and she publicly and repeatedly made plain that Ukraine should not complicate U.S.-South African relations. U.S. and South Africa have long histories of racism and apartheid and segregation, and they need to talk to each other about how they're coming to terms with their own domestic policies and problems, as well as economic issues that are complicated. And I thought that was a very encouraging statement. She said, you know, if the South Africans feel they can't vote at the UN with the United States, well, they didn't vote for Russia. They just took a non-committal position, which in effect was seen by many people, including me, as tilting toward Russia. But that's a choice that South Africa makes and is free to make.
All right, these cables that are suggesting that Russia has hijacked Ukrainian wheat and might sell it to Africa. If this is true, where does that leave Russia and where does that leave Africa?
Well, that's a very interesting and a complicated question because the chairman of the African Union, Macky Sall, the president of Senegal, and Faki, the chairperson of the African Commission, were in Sochi meeting Putin on Friday. And while they issued a joint communique on February 25th, I think, that was very condemnatory of the invasion of Ukraine, this was a warm and friendly meeting, or so it appeared, trying to get assurances of wheat availability. Now, the Ukrainians, which America is now trying to support without sending troops or escalating a conflict with Russia, the Ukrainians are yelling and screaming that, in fact, the reason that Africa is being deprived of wheat, and wheat it badly needs, is because of the blockade. Now, there may be some effort to get out of Crimea, which Russia annexed, remember, forcibly in 2014, contrary to international territorial integrity and sovereign equality rules that Africans have defended for years. But in any case, they have Crimea, and they could send, and they've allegedly sent 10 ships, which there have been video pictures of going to Turkey and to Syria, loaded apparently or reportedly with grain that Russia probably took from the Donbass reserves of Ukraine, or at least that's what the Ukrainians argue. Now, where the truth lies in all this, Peter, I don't know, but I don't blame African countries for saying we want food and we want food now. If the West is concerned about hungry Africans, give us some food. We'll take it from any source.
All right, and I was just about to ask that, actually. I mean, what does a country, for example, like Chad do? Say, look, we want food. We quite frankly don't care where it's from. But might there be consequences for that, though? Will US push Africa in a certain way, much like we've seen China do over issues regarding Tibet and even Taiwan?
Well, you know, each issue has its own dynamics politically and has to be weighed against other competing interests and values. I think that Africa is not strategically important to any of the major powers, thank God. And I think it's important for African agency to be expressed. I am quite distraught, and I gather others are as well, by the fact that the AU seems to be drifting right now. They didn't condemn the conflict in Ethiopia, which they should have, in my view. They didn't condemn they did condemn, but then had backed away from the invasion of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which they, in my view, should have done. But they can certainly criticize the American killings of blacks in Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, or they can certainly condemn the invasion of Iraq. I mean, these were bad incidents of consequence, and so I think Africans have to do some introspection and collectively. And I am sorry that they didn't have a unified position at the UN, because I think it's important for Africans to show that they can speak with one voice on the global stage.
It is difficult for a lot of African countries if one considers the liberation struggles. The Americas, the UKs of this world didn't help the causes here as much as the Russians and the Cubans, the Koreans and the Chinese. And so it becomes difficult, I guess, in a modern era to turn away from that historical help and connection.
Well, at our ANC branch, I debated Ronnie Casseroles on this issue, because Ronnie was trained in Odessa and spoke very nostalgically. And I said, you know, the Soviet Union had its faults, and as has America throughout its history, and I'm not drawing a moral comparison by any means. But that was then, and this is now. And what you have in Putin is a modern day czar interested in recolonizing neighbors. And that's bad by any standard. Whether or not you could criticize America for supporting apartheid, it was allied with apartheid. I was very active in protesting that alignment back in the 70s, and worked to try to overturn the support. And by the way, Joe Biden led the effort to override the veto that Reagan did of the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act. So, you know, it's politics, Peter, and you have to look at each situation as it unfolds. And in this case, I don't think it's fair to blame Ukraine for the blockade that it prevents their selling their and exporting their wheat to the 14 countries that desperately need it, most of which are in Africa, and particularly in North Africa, where the droughts have been so terribly bad for human survival.
The more we talk about Ukraine and other issues, the more one gets a sense of, is this not the Cold War playing out again? And Africa is caught in the middle yet again. Is because this conflict is starting to sound more and more the US versus Russia, even though he's got Western allies, even though Russia's got friends in China and North Korea, you name it. It does sound more and more as if it's Biden versus Putin.
No, it's certainly not. There is a question that Biden and Biden administration has, once the Ukrainians won essentially the battle over its capital, Kyiv. Remember when Vladimir Putin marched in on February 24th to Ukraine, he sent in forces that seemed overwhelming, but they were logistically poorly deployed. They were poorly led. The Russians underestimated the Ukrainian resistance, and the Americans in the West did pull together and provide sanctions and some military assistance. But as the Ukrainians showed their mettle and their nationalism, the West ponied up more assistance. But at the end of the day, you don't want to lose sight of the fact that Putin broke the rules. It's not the old Soviet Union, which it is something that is more akin to the czarists. And indeed, in the question now of food, the Ukrainians remember what Stalin did when he expropriated all the grain from the peasants back in 32 and 33 and caused perhaps 4 million deaths of Ukrainians. I mean, there's a long history, local history between Russia and Ukraine that needs to be kept in mind. Africa is beside the point. The problem, however, is that the unintended consequences like starvation and famine are complicated by the lack of grain availability, and how to get that grain availability down there, lift the blockade of Ukrainian ports, and the grain will flow out of the overstuffed silos.
Professor John Stremlau, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Enjoy Washington. I've no doubt lots of exciting things going on in that part of the world, just as we are back here at home.
I'm looking forward to Johannesburg. They've arrested the Guptas, you know.
Have a good evening. Thanks so much.